Good evening, and welcome to the West Hartford Board of Education meeting for today, Tuesday, December 4th, 2018. And I'd just like to say happy holidays to all who are celebrating. And we'll move right into the roll call, please. Tammy? Cammy?
Mrs. Blanks?
Here?
Dr. Greenberg?
Here.
Mr. Levine?
Here.
Mr. Paul-Uke?
Here.
Ms. Poland?
Here.
Dr. Thomas Sparkison?
Here.
Mr. Zdanowitz?
Here.
Student Representative Gus Bacon?
Here.
And Megan Striffcave.
And Megan, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
There's no revision to the agenda order, and we do have student participation this evening from our hall music department with a holiday music performance. And if there's any parents in the audience, you're welcome to come up so that you can take great photos from the front.
Brennan looks awesome right now.
Brendan and I have something to ask.
Yeah, sure.
just one someone happy, and you will be happy too, happy too. And you, I know that you will be happy too. You will be very happy, yes, you will be very happy too. You'll be happy too.
Mary, did you know that your baby boy would one day walk on water? Mary, did you know that your baby boy would save our sons and daughters? Did you know that your baby boy has come to make you new? This child that you deliver will soon deliver you.
Mary, did you know that your baby boy might to life? Mary, did you know that your baby boy was done with his hand? Did you know that your baby boy has walked where angels trod? When you kiss your little baby, you kiss the face of God. Mary, did you know? Mary, did you know? Mary, did you know? Mary, did you know?
The blind will see, the deaf will hear, the dead will live again. The lame will leap, the dumb will speak, the praises of the Lamb. Mary, did you know that your baby boy is Lord of all creation? Mary, did you know that your baby boy would one day rule the nations?
Did you know that your baby boy is heaven's perfect lamb? The sleeping child you're holding is the great I am. Mary, did you know? Oh, Mary, did you know? Mary, did you know? It's the night before Christmas, and all through the house not a creature is stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings are hung by the chimney with care, but hopes for Saint Nicholas I wish I could share. I am new to this world, I arrived here this morn, to this beautiful planet, though beat up and torn. I don't need a gift, need no more than I've got. Hear the unspoken wish from a tiny, tiny tot. I Nothing more, nothing less. I want it for keeps, and I promise to share, so that everyone who wants can cuddle and care. I only want the world for Christmas, the blue-green forever turning world for Christmas. To restore, to repossess, please make it last. My fate is in your hands. Oh, give me a present for the future. You could follow your heart, but you follow a whim, and fill up your stockings way over the brim, ignoring the signs in our frail crystal ball. You wish away, wish away, wish away all. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gives a luster of midday to objects below. Why your eyes won't see when they're given all this light. I wonder, this very special night. I only want the world for Christmas, the blue-green forever turning world for Christmas. To restore, to repossess, please make it last. My fate is in your hands. Oh, give me, oh, give me, oh, give me, oh, give me, oh, give me a present for the future.
My pleasure, our pleasure. Thanks. Thank you guys so much.
Absolutely awesome, wonderful performance. I mean, you've all really put me in the mood. I don't know about anybody else for Christmas. Beautiful, beautiful. Well done.
If I may say as well, wonderful job. You brought me through a range of emotions. I was just giving you a recognition that certainly is well deserved, and thank you so very much. I have to admit, I don't have waterproof mascara on. I was not expecting to get teary-eyed, and so I went from wanting to snap with you all to getting teary-eyed to smiling, and that just shows how angelic your voices are and how talented you are. So thank you so much for all that you do.
Tom, we need
Thanks, Mr. Bowles.
we need more of this, Tom. At our,
Every week.
you know, this is why they say, why did you join the Board of Ed? Or like, Mark, why did you join Town Council? Because I don't want to watch firemen climb ladders at our meetings. So, you know. That's unbelievable. Thank you.
Thank you again, Hall. Now, we will move to the next item on the agenda, which is public communications. And we do have 4 individuals that are signed up. So as Jeremy Pressman is the first one signed up. So as you're making your way, just to go over some ground rules for you, Jeremy, you do have 3 minutes to speak, and at the 1 minute mark, 2 minute mark, you'll have the yellow card. and then when you've exhausted your time, you'll have the red card. And if you exhaust that, then I'll give you a friendly warning to wrap it up.
Is there a hook?
No hook.
My name is Jeremy Pressman. I live at 39 Warwick Street. I'd like to comment on school start times. I think of my family as a typical West Hartford family running from here to there to support our children in their academic, athletic, and social endeavors. Over the years, I've been a head coach in West Hartford youth basketball, YMCA basketball, and West Hartford Little League. My two older sons, one of whom is now at Hall, and one is a Hall graduate, have spent 13 seasons and counting on Hall athletic teams. I've listened to discussions, some before this body, and read reports and comments. The material has led me to three conclusions. First, when we move high school start times later, we put our student athletes in a better position to excel. They will sleep more, allowing for equally good or better focus during practice or games. Their bodies will be in equally or better position to avoid injury. Second, when we move high school start times later, we enhance the safety and security of each and every student. We help reduce anxiety, depression, and suicide. On the roads, we put students in the position to be better rested drivers, reducing dangers they pose not only to themselves but also to other drivers. When the board votes on changing start times, I'm in favor of better student health and safety rather than the current high school start times. Third, when we move high school start times later, we put our students in a better position to excel academically. At the core of every school is academics. We can lower absenteeism so high school students have more time to learn. We can put students' minds and bodies in a better position to listen, to participate, and to absorb complex and stimulating ideas. In their mission statement, the West Hartford schools pledge to, quote, prepare all students to realize their potential, unquote. Just like parental oversight of screen time before bedtime, adopting better suited hours for teen sleeping is a proven method for helping students realize their potential. In conclusion, I hope you, the board, will think about the big picture. Schools change over time. There was a time when half-day kindergarten was the norm. There was a time when we thought that schools teaching foreign languages only in upper grades was sufficient. There was a time when a week-long February break was deemed essential. All those things changed because parents and educators and policymakers and students recognized we could do better by our students, helping them become more engaged, more capable, and more successful in the classroom and in life. The reason that strong school districts like Newtown, Connecticut, or Wayland, Massachusetts, have moved high school start times later is because they understand that times have changed. The evidence on start times is clear. The time to act is now. Members of the Board of Education, I and many others in this town are counting on you to take the next step and adopt this change to school start times. Thank you.
Chris Corcoran.
Good evening. My name is Chris Corcoran. I live at 21 Bryan Road in West Hartford, Connecticut. And I'd like to thank the board for the opportunity tonight to speak. I'm also going to focus my remarks on the school start time proposal. And I'm going to focus a bit on the last meeting, which was much more lively than this one. I agree. The Madrigals was a much better beginning to that meeting. There's obviously a lot of energy on both sides of this discussion. A lot of folks are in favor, like this previous speaker, of adjusting school start times, and then there are those that are opposed. In my opinion, this is the kind of thing that leads to meaningful dialogue at the town level. People come to these meetings, and they're able to provide testimony in favor or opposed. Unfortunately, it felt like, especially last week, it really, that kind of took a turn for the ugly. There was accusations of this deal being done in secrecy, a lack of transparency. A few people are kind of orchestrating this whole thing. And I say right now, I disagree, and nothing could be farther from the truth. I became involved as a concerned citizen, at that time a parent of a high school student. Actually, my daughter graduated. She's a junior at college now at Clark. My son, though, is a seventh grader over at Bristow School, so he's right in the middle of this conversation, really. I came before the board and gave testimony previously. I've written letters, emails. I've met with other parents that are also concerned and in favor of this change, because that's what people do. When you want to organize around something, you get together, you make a plan, and then you execute the plan. Again, this concept that this whole thing was done in behind closed doors or last minute or without knowledge of the public is because people weren't paying attention, and that's not the right reason to place blame on people, especially the members of the board who I think were unfairly mischaracterized. The School Start Time Committee, I got involved in 2017. I looked it up. The School Start Time Committee started in 2017. There is 22 members of the committee. I read that there was parents, teachers, administrators, students. I wrote a few things down. I generally speak from the hip, but there were 7 meetings since September 2017. They presented to this board on 5 occasions, and they even had a family information night. This is not what I would describe as secret or back room. This is the process, and I think that there has been ample opportunity for people to become involved. So for people who are just joining the conversation, I welcome it. I think it's great to have conversation back and forth, and they should organize and they should try and get the change made that they want made. But don't denigrate the people who have put a lot of time and effort into this already. And I would be strongly in favor of adjusting school start times when it comes to a vote. Thank you for your time.
Kate Mauser. Jen?
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Mariano. I live at 17 Hickory Lane. I am a writer with a pediatric nursing background and a mother of 2 children in the district. I would like to speak against school start time change. The American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Academy for Sleep Medicine, the American Medical Association, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention all either recommend or support later school start times for adolescents. However, it is imperative to note that all of these positions and recommendations are for both middle and high school students. The proposed start time change chooses to serve only one part of that adolescent population and does so at the expense of the other. There is no sound argument for why the older of the 2 populations should be given priority in any proposed schedule change. In fact, the opposite is true from a developmental standpoint. Middle schoolers are at a greater risk of harm during commutes in the dark and during unsupervised time after school. If members of this board choose to acknowledge the science and recommendations of the aforementioned governing bodies and the medical community, then they need to do so for the entire adolescent population. And also follow the recommendations to provide good sleep education for all West Hartford Public School students, first and foremost. And finally, until a solution that serves both middle school and high school students can be found, no change should occur. Thank you.
The next agenda item is unfinished business, and I don't believe there is any. So there isn't any new business. And that brings us to staff communications and reports by our superintendent, Mr. Moore.
Excellent. Good evening, and happy holiday season to all. A couple announcements. Tomorrow is a big day. We've been talking about this for over a year. The Future Educative Diversity tomorrow will formally be at Central Connecticut State University, and we'll be meeting with Kim Costello, the Dean of the School of Education and Professional Studies, and President Zulma Toro, and formalizing our partnership with our kids there for the Future Educators of Diversity with CCSU, known as Blue Devil Direct. And as part of this, there'll be a panel discussion tomorrow about future of education, what it looks like for our kids. Admissions officers will be there, as well as financial aid, current faculty, and students. And then later in the day, in the afternoon, our kids will do a campus tour of the Anatomy and Physiology Lab, the Athletic Training Room, the Biomechanics Lab, Exercise Physiology Lab, Nursing Lab, Instructional Technology Lab, and the Literacy Center. Now, I want to be clear, this doesn't funnel our future educators diversity into one place. But it does give them the opportunity for early admissions at Central Connecticut State University, early admissions to the education department at CCSU, and scholarship money that is available. With that, we guarantee continued mentoring while those kids are there. Central Connecticut is helping out as those kids meet here at both Conard and Hall. They donate a professional library to our kids. Our kids are now going down to our younger grades and visiting and doing kind of a pre-practicum before they're in college. And so we have people from Central coming here now. And while they're at Central, we plan on continuing to offer mentoring support, opportunities here in West Hartford for practicum, student teaching. And then once they complete it and going through any of our future educative diversity, we have promised a interview to once they have their teaching certification, a guaranteed interview at West Hartford Public Schools. So this is one of those things where if you're concerned about the future and there doesn't seem to be a solution, use the resource you have. And the resource we have is great kids. And so developing this partnership has gone from 6 kids 6 years ago to now 40 kids at our 2 high schools, actually more than 40 kids. And it's spread to both of our high schools. Dynamic, great program, and I owe particular thanks to our assistant principals at each school that have helped to oversee it. Jamal Hines at Conard, Kim Ambrose at Hall. Be remiss if I didn't mention Laura White at Hall, who's also been deeply involved, and Rosina Haskins, who has overseen this. So it's really a great day for West Hartford Public Schools, and it's a great day for Central, and mostly for our kids. So with that, this month's connections that got mailed to you, and if you got a chance to take a look at it, highlighted in pictures is the opportunities for our food service culinary training program for our post-secondary program that we talked about last year that you guys funded. And we had an open house last week that parents went to, the week before last, that parents went to, and they were so impressed. And it has really been a great program under the leadership of Yasmin Binns already. And I just want to point out, not only has that been created, but the agribusiness training, the partnership with our farms, where our kids are going over and working with farming and looking at foods. And it's not, we talked before about restaurants, but we're really talking about food prep from supermarkets to restaurants, commissaries, all different type of programs. But it's still not, I blanch at calling it a occupation training program, because it's not really that. That could be a byproduct of it. But it's almost an engagement program for our kids, teaching life skills as well as possible occupational skills. So it has been already, in just its short history, it just got off the ground so well. And we're very lucky to have Yasmin. And in addition, it showed pictures from our school engagement program, which is highlighted at Beachland House. And we talked about school refusal last year being a national problem. I think we brought it up at this point, and then in the budget you addressed it, which we appreciate. And the early returns on this program are tremendous. And this is one of those investments that's already paying off in terms of what you're not paying for outplacements, what you're not paying for time at the IOL. And for families also, in addition to what the district is saving. And we've already got kids reentering schools. We've got kids coming every day that hadn't come in a long time, that were having real difficulty. And I thank Gretchen for her leadership, but I thank the board for the funding. And I do want you to know this is one of those where I always say, wait 3 years, because things take a while to get off the ground. But the early returns on these both are very, very positive. So I wanted you to give that update. And with that, holiday concerts everywhere. I know everybody is busy. This is just a great season. You saw the Madrigals here tonight. But I don't want Unified Theater at Hall on Friday night to get lost. As you know, a couple years ago, Hall added a show. The high schools combined for Unified Theater, and there's a fall show at Hall of Winter. That's this weekend, and the one at Conard with both schools combined also will be in end of May, beginning of June. So if you could make it, that would be great.
Any questions for Tom? Okay. Next on the agenda is staff reports and board discussions. First up is specific learning disability and dyslexia. Those approaching the table is Dr. Gretchen Nelson, and Mrs. Kerry Jones will report along with some other folks that we'll be introduced to shortly.
I'll let Gretchen take the lead, but this is, of course, dyslexia education got a special designation in legislation, which made every school district have to shift exactly what we're doing and how we're doing it. So it's appropriate for us to report on you of how we're meeting that legislation and the needs of kids. So, Gretchen.
Yeah. Thank you very much for having us and for your interest in this topic. I'd like to start by acknowledging the hard work of this presentation group. So Kerry Jones and Rochelle Schippa and Miss Melissa Caballero and Magdalia Fletcher. And I'm going to start off by introducing, with the first slide, to talk to you about what exactly is dyslexia. I think there are a lot of myths out there, and it's really important to clear up those myths. And so dyslexia affects how an individual's brain sees and handles or processes written information. No two people with dyslexia are the same. However, there are clusters of patterns of brain activity that can be categorized as dyslexia. Some people with dyslexia may have difficulty matching letters to sounds or remembering how to spell words. They may have difficulty telling left to right, remembering multiple directions, and they may need extra time to process information or to retrieve a word. Individuals with dyslexia often have strengths, though, in other areas and could be very good at seeing patterns and solving problems, imagining and rotating objects in their head, recalling and telling stories, and having very positive social and interpersonal strengths. And I think it's really important to note that. In accordance with the IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Act, students in Connecticut who've been found eligible as a person requiring specialized instruction for a specific learning disability have had an IEP that is very specific to their individual reading needs. However, in 2014, 15, and 16, the state of Connecticut adopted a series of laws that specifically addresses dyslexia in terms of identification, assessment, interventions, and teacher preparation. And so in response to those laws, which Connecticut is one of 11 states in the country that currently have a set of comprehensive laws around dyslexia, which has been an increasing number, and I anticipate that that number will continue to increase, but we are still one of only 11. We have laws now on the books that require school systems to respond pretty comprehensively to students who have the potential of needing support around dyslexia. Our report tonight is going to walk you through West Hartford's response to this legislation. In particular, I'd like to highlight the collaborative work that's happened kind of across the hallway between curriculum and pupil services. This really has been a joint effort between both sides of our school system, equally represented by both. And as a result, all the students in West Hartford have benefited from well-informed evaluators, interventionists, and specialists that are teachers trained to detect, assess, and remediate reading difficulties, including dyslexia. And now Kerry, Director of Elementary Education.
Thank you. So when this legislation passed, we recognized that there were some principles that needed to guide our work. So before we got to work, we had to step back and say, what are some of the big picture principles that needed to guide our work? We knew we needed, as Gretchen said, to be collaborative, that we needed to engage professionals who were both reading specialists, who had backgrounds in reading intervention and reading expertise, but also special educators, speech and language pathologists, psychologists, people who really understood the special education realm. We knew we needed coherence. We needed a systemic approach across a district K-12 for both early intervention for students who are at risk for dyslexia, as well as identification of students with this specific learning disability. We needed to be systemic in our process. What did we currently have in place? In terms of our existing diagnostic assessments, we wanted to be economical. We wanted to be efficient. What did we currently have in place that we could utilize in this process? We wanted to know what was our teachers' current knowledge about dyslexia. We needed to inventory our current programs, our current assessments, our current teacher knowledge. We needed to develop a continuum of supports across the learning needs. We know students who are identified with dyslexia can have a range of learning needs, as Gretchen said. There's not one profile of a student with dyslexia. There's a wide range and continuum of needs. So we needed to develop, as such, a continuum of supports, and we needed to think about that right from the very beginning. And finally, to ensure equity across all of our schools, K-12, we needed to make sure we had a consistency of implementation and access to any new learning tools or assessments or processes that were developed. We needed to make sure this happened not just in one school or at one grade level or at one level in particular. This happened across the board. So to explain how we did so, to explain how we achieved those guiding principles, Melissa Caballero, our director, one of our department supervisors for pupil services, will explain our timeline and our process. And we'll go into a little more depth as each person speaks. I also want to acknowledge Kelly Sousa, who could not be with us here tonight. She is one of our literacy coaches at the secondary level.
So to take you through our timeline, in 2015, when Connecticut law had passed legislation regarding dyslexia, the first responsive action on the West Hartford education was to develop the steering committee, and that was comprised of our four leading ladies, Carrie, Rochelle, Migdalia, and Kelly Sousa, who was referenced earlier, who isn't able to be with us this evening. And they had the foresight to look across that hallway and determine the need for a K through 12 interdisciplinary team as part of our work group. In the first year of our work group, the first thing that they targeted was grounding our understanding in the definitions of SLD dyslexia. What is it? What is that understanding? And what do we know about it? What do we currently know? How do we deepen our understanding? And what are our protocols for identification that are currently in place? The second year of our work group, we focused on professional learning and turnkeying that professional learning from the work group to our individual schools, developing diagnostic plans, and professional development in inventorying our current structured literacy programs for tiered interventions and specialized interventions. This current year, our focus is on professional learning and also acquiring new resources that were identified when we looked at what our needs were. Rochelle's going to go a little deeper into what those years looked like.
Okay, so thanks, Melissa. So as Melissa was saying, in 2016, Kerry got a group of special educators and regular educators together to start planning what our response was going to be to this new legislation that had been given to us from the state of Connecticut. And our initial task as a steering committee was to educate ourselves about the legislation. I mean, we couldn't develop this work group and start sharing our knowledge until we really built our own capacity and what this legislation was about. So that was really our initial task. And then we also talked about that importance of the cross-disciplinary need to develop that work group K-12 and to make sure that it was a district-wide collaborative effort. We focused on developing a common understanding of dyslexia, as Melissa stated, and that's very easy just to say, but as Gretchen's definition, as you listen to Gretchen's definition of dyslexia, I mean, we are still ongoing with our common understanding of dyslexia and making sure that we spread the word correctly in our schools. We also really spent a lot of time developing protocols. So if we have a student now that's going through the identification process for SLD dyslexia, we have developed these common protocols, K-12 now, so when we're in meetings about students, we're using the same language when we're talking about the identification process. And we also talked about the turnkey. It was very, very important for our work group members to go back into their buildings. How do I do this? Thank you. So that was in our initial year with the steering committee and the initial work group. In our second year, we actually expanded our steering committee and our work group. We thought it was very important to bring Melissa aboard our steering committee, and also Chris Nystrom, who is a secondary department supervisor. So we kind of expanded our outlook on this. Also, we made sure in our work group we had representation from all 16 of our schools, plus Strive, and cross-disciplinary again. So we have 7 special educators, 5 speech and language, 5 reading specialists, 2 school psychologists, and a building administrator as part of our work group, in addition to the steering committee. We use 3 state-based guiding documents, and we continue to use these guiding documents for our work in the work group. The FAQ, the frequently asked questions about dyslexia, really helped us in gaining that common understanding of what dyslexia is, and we continue to refer to that document developed by the state of Connecticut. We use the state guidelines in order to make sure that all of our work is always adhering to SRBI guidelines and tiered intervention for all students, not just students we're talking about with possible dyslexia. And the assessment resource that we use, we made sure that the document from the state are the assessments that we use now for the screening of students, as well as in the identification of a student with SLD dyslexia. We use the state-approved assessments, and we use that resource to guide us. I did include all links, live links to these resources in the report. So if you would like further information or to dive in further, they are located in the report under the resource section. And now I'll turn it over to McDalia.
Hi. So our primary focus for the work group really has been to develop these district-wide protocols for dyslexia management, and it's across these 4 domains. Extensive research over the past 20 years has confirmed the key things are early identification and early treatment for students with dyslexia. So therefore, our work group really made it our first priority to develop a screening process that analyzes classroom performance, it looks at tiered intervention data, and also looks at the results of very targeted assessments in order to flag students who are at risk for dyslexia as quickly as possible. We then developed an assessment and identification protocol with very specific guidelines for comprehensive special education testing that would lead to an appropriate identification of dyslexia, as well as measure the severity level of the disability in order to really determine the eligibility for services for special education, but also to provide classroom accommodations for those students who needed them. The term structured literacy refers to a very specific approach to reading instruction, and it's one that's been proven to be the most effective for students with dyslexia. So the work group spent a lot of time identifying some very strong research-based reading interventions that follow that structured literacy approach, and it's for students across all grade levels. So the combination of these 4 district protocols that we focused on have really given us the ability in a very short period of time to ensure that students with dyslexia are appropriately identified and quickly placed in a structured literacy intervention. And it's through a very consistent process that's followed in every school across the district. So, Kerry's going to talk about data. So I think it's important to talk about the data. How many students are we talking about here in terms of this process? So you look at the gray column, those are students over the past year, roughly November 17 to November 18, who have either gone through a screening process with a reading specialist who's done a diagnostic screening, or have gone through a special education, a more formal special education evaluation process, and you'll see the numbers there. So 32 students in that course of that year, went through a screening or diagnostic process. Currently, in orange, you'll see we have, at all the levels, 11 students who are currently in a screening process as of November 15th, and in green, we have another 16 students who are currently in a special education evaluation process specifically for dyslexia. So of those 32 students who went through a process over the past year, what was their final result? Back one. Of those 32 students, 35 were found to have a specific learning disability, dyslexia. There were another couple students who were identified with a specific learning disability of dyslexia, but were found not to require an individualized education program, but needed accommodations in their classroom. So had a 504 plan put into place, which is a legal document saying they needed special accommodations in their classroom instruction, but did not require that special programming in order to succeed in the classroom setting. There were another 28% of students of the 32 who were found to have other disabilities, predominantly speech and language, a few with other health impairments, and other disabilities. But 31%, roughly a third of those 32 students, did not qualify as having any disability through that process, through that screening or evaluation process. So I just think that those numbers are indicative. We'd expect to see a similar type of outcome with the remaining students who are currently in the screening or identification process. There were some other students who were, and Gretchen can probably speak a little, or Magdalena speak a little more to this, but we had other students who may have had a identification for a learning disability, but a more broad learning disability, who have gone through our new screening and diagnostic protocols, who now have a specific learning disability identification of dyslexia. So they may have had a generalized reading disability, they've gone through our new identification process protocols, and so our total now of students currently as of 2 weeks ago who are identified with dyslexia are 46 students in our entire district, which is 3.4% of our total students with disabilities. We have 9 additional students who have 504 plans, who have plans, they have a disability of dyslexia, but they have a 504 accommodation plan in place. They do not require a specialized instructional plan. So that just gives you a little sense of the numbers we're talking about of students currently in our district. And we're available for questions.
If I could add one piece. So sometimes when we talk about unfunded mandates from the state, people think that an unfunded mandate is something inherently bad. It's bad in that we don't get funding. But it's not that the idea in and of itself. This was specific to dyslexia. The idea that dyslexia specifically was underdiagnosed in partnerships with school. So the legislation itself, 55 kids, I feel comfortable saying we're helping better or at least differently, and we have a better understanding it as a district. You take it across the state, that's a lot of kids that are getting help. It's a good thing. But I want to point out, so it's clear that we've devoted a lot of resources and a lot of work to this. You've supported that financially. There was no support from that from the state. So when we talk at budget time, as we do, about special education costs, about reading specialists, these are the extra kind of interwoven pieces of work that's good work. I'm not saying they shouldn't have passed it. They should have given some more funding for it. But the other piece that ties in, because 504 were mentioned, we'll come back to this later in the year and we'll talk about 504s. Our number of 504s has doubled in 2 years. The amount of work that it takes with each 504, it's doubled in district in 2 years. So, and that also has to do with some legal shifts in definition, but what we have to do hasn't shifted. It's just we have to do it twice as often now as we used to. So the resources that these things require as they present, and I don't want to take away from the report, but I do want to contextualize the report in kind of how you fund this and how the state operates legislatively with education. So
Questions? Cheryl?
Thank you very much. Ever since a few years ago, there was a presentation on dyslexia that I was really affected by, and so I've been paying attention to it ever since. And so I want to ask you specifically about the structured literacy intervention program, or whatever it is that you then do once you identify these kids. Because this particular presentation, it was incredibly moving. This guy who had dyslexia read the first novel he had ever read in his entire life by putting it on his phone, one word at a time. And I just thought, that's quite a set of swipes. But it was just a moment where I realized that technology really can make a huge difference. And so I wondered what kinds of interventions you use. Is technology part of it? How do you approach it?
I think Migdalia is probably the best qualified right here to answer that question.
So I had a hidden slide because I knew you were going to ask that question. I didn't want to take up too much time, so I hid it. So a structured literacy approach is really, it's two things. It's a set of elements that you target and focus on, and those are the elements here. So we're looking at phonology, we're looking at sound symbol awareness, syllables, morphology. So these are all of the pieces that are directly taught. And those elements, the way that they're taught really makes the difference for a student with dyslexia, because it's not something that they're going to inherently pick up. They need to be directly instructed in every element. And so the other piece of that structured literacy approach is that the instruction given has to be systematic, cumulative. So you teach them step one, and then they don't move on to step two until they've learned step one. So that's what it means about being cumulative and explicit. And then it's also diagnostic in that the teacher has to be able to look at how the student's performing and change and tweak what they're doing based on the assessments that they're getting back from the student. So it's a very explicit, very intensive intervention that has to be given, and it's also known to be the most effective for students with dyslexia. So that's why we went with it. Does that answer your question?
Other questions?
Thank you very much. I have two questions. First comment, I appreciate how you recognize the value of early identification and early intervention. So with that, one of the slides you had the 3 different implementations per elementary, middle, and high school. And just looking at those numbers, it seemed as though the numbers were higher at elementary, and then once, yes, right there. Is it safe to say that because of you abiding by the principle of early identification, that's why by the time you get to high school, the number is as low? Yes? Okay. All right. Yes. Great, great, great. Second question is, the pie graph you had where you identified, once testing was done, about 31% of students were found not to qualify for services. Question is then what? What other things are explored? Because something triggered the assessment being done in the first place. So how is that further looked into?
I'll take that. So I'm the literacy or intervention specialist for the district, so we kind of streamline all of our literacy interventions and our SRBI processes throughout all the schools, and we make sure that if a student is still in need of intervention, even if they did not qualify for special education support, they may go back into a regular intervention program with a reading specialist or an early intervention teacher to, provide the additional support that they do need in the regular educational setting. And of course, those interventionists work closely with the classroom teacher as well, so the extra support is given in the class as well. Sometimes too, when we are asked to, sometimes we're asked to screen students because we haven't screened students forever for dyslexia, and maybe some of these kids were like, we really don't know, and now we have these tools available to us, let's just see. We don't want our kids falling through the cracks. Nobody wants to send a child to the next grade thinking, should I have done more? And so I think some of those numbers may reflect that as well. We just want to make sure that the students aren't being missed.
Thank you. I appreciate hearing that because I imagine that level of vigilance goes beyond state mandate. So thank you very much.
Mark?
Excuse me. Thank you. Prior to 2015, I'm not a big fan of the state getting involved in what we do here in West Hartford, but this seems to be one of those cases. So walk me through, I mean, I guess a child having dyslexia in second, third grade would be picked up by a reading specialist and worked on and worked closely with from that point forward. So why did the state need to get involved? And I mean, what were we doing with these kids prior to this? And you know, was it going underdiagnosed like you said? And if so, how come we didn't catch this? And why did the state need to get involved for us to have to track? And yeah, go ahead. Thanks.
It's a really good question, actually. So for a really long time, dyslexia was like the do not say word. It was known as a neurobiological disorder. It was very hard to diagnose. And we really didn't have assessment tools in the world of education to really look at that. And it really wasn't until more recent years where educators really started identifying dyslexia as being a very, very specific disability with specific characteristics and specific treatments. So I think the state got involved when they started to notice that while we had always been responsive, so to your question, what did we do with these students? They always existed, but we would go through our traditional process. They'd go through the tiers. If those tiers weren't working, there might be a referral to special education, and they would be diagnosed with a more broad learning disability. That doesn't mean that their needs were not met. What it means is that while they were identified as a mandation of learning disability, we were driving our instructional practices to meet their needs. Similar to what we do now, just the mandation is different. So we still had structured literacy interventions. We still had very targeted instruction for students who might have phonological processing disorders, but it was just named something differently. And so to Rochelle's piece when she was talking about some of those numbers, some of that too is us taking a closer look. Students who might have had a mandation of specific learning disability, we've since come back to the table and said, let's refine this even more. Let's take another look at this child and let's find out if there is this particular disability within that domain. You're welcome.
Other questions? I have a small question. So in your presentation, you stated that there's about 46 students in the district with dyslexia, which is about 3%. And so what I wanted to know is how do we compare with other districts of similar size? And I'm thinking that's a relatively small number, but in the grand scheme of things, when you're comparing district to district, what does that all mean?
We are actually lower than the state average for dyslexia. And I think part of that is that we have done a very good job in this district of identifying learning disabilities and meeting individual needs through the IEP. And so we have met a lot of those needs early on for those students who would probably be categorized as having a lighter support requirement. And so the students that are coming in, we are catching those that do have the need, but our average is slightly lower. We've also been very responsive to this law in a very comprehensive, thoughtful way, and I'm not quite sure that every other district is really at the place where we are.
Another just quick point is we've also put into place some structured literacy interventions as core instruction. So at kindergarten and first grade, we've put in some core instructional practices that around phonemic awareness and phonics, phonological awareness for all children at K and 1 to make sure that all children at kindergarten and first grade have some core instruction and core knowledge of sound and symbol and those relationships. And making sure that professional development for teachers is there so that there really isn't that opportunity for any child to be missing out on that core foundational instruction. So we've made some shifts even just at our core base instructional piece. So we're finding that when even there's intervention needed, they can intervene more quickly because that core foundational language and knowledge is there for all children. So in second grade, if there's just a little boost needed, and then children are able to move on, we're able to capture at-risk students or students maybe who have mild dyslexia much more quickly.
Getting hung up on a name or a label can be difficult, and something Gretchen's spoken about before, I've spoken about, and oftentimes we use autism as an example because people say, well, what is autism? And autism's a human spectrum. I mean, just like there's such a wide spectrum. And so we talk about broadening out and not using that definition to define a child as we get broad. What this did, in effect, by identifying dyslexia, is did the opposite. It kind of narrowed the topic of, okay, label this child specifically with dyslexia, not for a bad reason, but because there are specific now research, as research has developed, as dyslexia has been studied more and more targeted approaches that can meet that unique disability, which doesn't mean that they don't have a touch of a reading issue or a piece of it. I mean, if you,
That's a good point, Tom, and I never looked at it that way until you said that, because we are so afraid to label people, right? And this is an example, and you bring it up, and I think it's the same in mental health as well. In general, we say mental health, right? But you don't focus in on exactly what. And if we did that, those labels really help people, right? Because then you get the right resources, you get the right avenues for success. So labels aren't always, it's aren't a bad thing. And in this case, it shows that if we can narrow down into, a one word and then therefore have 0 in high school, it works, right? And I don't think we should be such afraid of labels then in that case,
I think when they're medical and, as you said, neurobiological, Melissa gave the best. That was great, that definition you gave. That helped me tremendously. Then it's something I'm not afraid of at all. People mislabel all the time, and you're exactly right. Once it's studied, once it's focused, and then if that can help us to do a targeted intervention, that's when it's a positive. I agree.
And it benefits that one child, if 0.4%, I think that number is actually smaller than that, 46 out of 9,700 kids. But anyway, it's just elementary? It says K through 12.
Okay. No, that's right. Yeah.
So, but it doesn't, and so, again, if we could focus in on that, that's wonderful, because then, again, we always talk about helping that one kid, right? If a teacher does her whole career and that, that one kid becomes Bill Gates or becomes a successful pianist or whatever the case may be.
Mark Zidanowicz.
They're still, listen, my parents, they're not, but you know what I mean? It's just that we always talk about that one kid, and in that case, if this didn't come out and, what was it, 30 or 46 students didn't get identified with, then they fall. Those are the kids we talk about falling through the cracks, and albeit a small number, those is a tremendous, huge number, 46. It's a huge number. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Deb.
Yes, hi. Thank you for your presentation. Can you talk a little bit about the partnership with the families of these students to help reinforce what they're learning in school back in their homes?
I sit in a lot of meetings with families, so I think I'm apt to speak about this. We do an excellent job of partnering with our families, but I think it starts really early on, and I want to give kudos to our early intervention teams that really start at the pre-K and K level, but then also through tiered interventions, because once those start, that's when we really start having more regular communication, not just at marking periods when report cards are coming out, but we're keeping parents informed that their child is receiving some type of literacy intervention, and we're having regular communication with them about how they're doing in those interventions and what their progress is. And so we also talk at that time about profiles, and we begin discussing within the literacy domain what their child's profile looks like. Oftentimes, parents are coming to us also with similar concerns. I notice when I'm reading with my child at home, I notice they have difficulty sounding out words. I notice that my child memorizes these text. I notice that my child understands what's being read, but it doesn't have an interest in reading themselves. So they'll come to us too and seek that partnership and ask the hard questions. So I believe that the partnership starts really early on, and we are very fortunate that we have a lot of technological resources, and we're living in a day and age where we can use technology to remove a lot of barriers. We're also very fortunate here in the town of West Hartford that we have assistive technology specialists, we have technology people at all of our buildings, we have a wealth of computers and iPads, and we do use those resources to remove a lot of the barriers that these students face and share resources with families. It's given us avenues to help families access specific learning and reading levels at the home. We find that technology can sometimes be more engaging. And then also we use our library media specialists and our literacy specialists and coaches in our buildings who have specific knowledge about different books that might have a different appearance. So when we're talking about students who might be in the 3rd and 4th grade, their peers are starting to read novels, but their developmental level isn't there. They might have resources and tools of things they can recommend, such as graphic novels. It looks like a novel, might be a little bit more readable. And for us as educators, it's another inroads for us to help families in encouraging students' love for learning and reading.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, hearing none. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you for your questions.
Our next staff communication and reports are graduation requirements by Mr. Paul Vicinus and Ms. Ann McKernan will report.
I'll let Paul and Ann do the heavy lifting with the actual details, but since we're on the subject of unfunded mandates, this actually is the legislation that's going back now like a decade, which kept getting pushed off about changing graduation requirements. I will say this from the start before you do, Mark, because I know you're going to say it, and you're right. Nobody's questioned that Conard and Hall graduates are not prepared for the world they're entering. Nobody is. I speak to a lot of admissions directors, that doesn't come up. The state passed these. We've kind of waited because they've been continuously delayed. These aren't getting delayed anymore. And so we've got some significant work to do. What they're doing tonight just is this is your appetizer. This is the menu that you're getting to see. This is just a reminder of what exactly the state has passed as we really, I don't want to say begin studying because we have been, but now we've got dedicated groups focused on this area. So with that.
Thanks, Tom. Obviously, I'm joined here by Ian McKernan, our Director of Secondary Ed, and Tom stole a lot of my thunder that I was going to say. This is the first in a series of communications. We have this board report. We have other planned board reports. We have some planned communications with the subcommittee of the board that looks at policy, as well as a lot of work in terms of a graduation committee that Ian is helping to organize and orchestrate that's taking a real systemic look at this. And again, while this is our first opportunity to talk about this with you in earnest, it's not our first time that we've talked about it. The state has kicked the can down the road, but as Tom just kind of mentioned, this really seems to be gaining the traction, and it would appear that these graduation requirements will indeed go into effect for the class of 2023, which is our current 8th grade class, our rising 9th graders next year. So just in terms of overview, and I know you've seen the report, from the state perspective, from what the state requires, essentially the big picture is that the minimum number of credits is moved up to 25. All right. They've added world language as a requirement, which we're actually quite pleased with. We think that's something that's been overdue within the state, so we're glad to see that requirement there. They've also added a capstone experience as a requirement. That's an experience that can take many forms, and as we talk about where we think we want to land on that, we'll bring you that recommendation. The nice part about that to know is that's not a seat hour requirement. Okay, that's some form of educational experience students would participate in that sort of demonstrates their their ability to put all the pieces together and move forward and do good work. They increased the specific requirements in health. I think we talked a little bit about that last year when we were at the table, and we were looking at potential cuts in this area and said that those cuts might be a little bit short-sighted given the fact that this legislation existed and we expected it would get passed and stay passed, I should say. One of the things that's fairly significant that's causing us to do a lot of good thinking and bring recommendations forward to you is how they're now umbrelling the credits as opposed to having very course-specific requirements, and I'll go through that in the next slide. They lump them into these larger categories of humanities and STEM. And they do still maintain some very course-specific requirements, such as civics and a minimum course distribution within the arts. So that's kind of the big picture. Let's look at it in a little bit more detail in a smaller font. And now what we're comparing there on the left are the new state requirements versus what's on the right. And I know in the report we talked a lot about the old state requirements against the new state requirements. We thought for this we'll just add in the tinge of, well, how does West Hartford do it? And really, West Hartford had pretty much the same requirements as the state with just a little additional specificity within social studies and a little bit more physical education that I know we talked about last year. So kind of looking left to right and using the language of the new state requirements under humanities. The new requirements are you need to get a total of 9 credits. And so in West Hartford, we've always required 4 credits of English language arts, and we've required a total of 3 credits of social studies broken out specifically as you see them there, which our half-credit course in American government covered our civics requirement. And so there is still a civics requirement, although the state has now taken off whether districts want to call it a half credit, a full credit, a tenth of a credit. You know, we're going to have some say over that, and we'll bring you a specific recommendation as to how we consider we'll do business. The state has always required 1 credit in arts, or I should say previously required 1 credit in arts or technology education. So you see on the West Hartford side, I have that listed twice, but it was an or statement, not an and statement. The language now by the state is they're saying you still have to have some arts, and now they're also saying you have to have 9 combined credits within STEM, which includes, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So the state essentially moved that or statement of 1 credit in arts or technology pretty much to an and by lumping some of the arts under humanities and some technology under STEM. As you see there, historically under STEM, we had required 3 credits in mathematics, and we had followed the state model, which said you had to have 1 physical science and 1 life science. So that is the area where you see a fairly large increase in terms of a distribution of credits. The state added, as we said, they plussed up the health education from what we previously had as a quarter credit to a full credit. They added the world language, the capstone, and essentially have free play within electives from 7 previously to 3. Pause there for that to soak in. As Tom mentioned, we're spending significant time talking about what are those things within these graduation requirements that we want to maintain our flexibility with, and what are those things that we might look at where we provide that specificity. So just thinking about those humanities credits, historically we said, no, you have to have English all 4 years. Would we move away from that? Because the new language of the state says, listen, it just needs to total up to 9 credits overall. So theoretically, I can have 1 English class and 8 social studies. And I know Tom would be all for that, but as a history teacher, but we may not wish to choose to go in that direction. So that's really a big piece of the work that we're looking at as we consider. We've started to take a look at historical graduating classes, to look at credit distribution, understand where the needs lie. And as I said at the beginning, this is really just a first in a series of reports where we will have communication with you and with our public through whether it's the subcommittee policy and we're bringing you recommendations, or it's a full-fledged report here at the board to update you on the progress overall and to seek additional guidance should we need it. But this is probably the most important thing that we are working on this year. So with that, I'll open it up to the board for questions for Ann and myself.
Sure.
sorry, I have a few different questions, and the first is just specific. The mastery-based diploma assessment, is that the capstone?
Correct. That's a capstone, and there's really a lot of room for us as a district to define what we will let that mean.
Okay. So the first is just sort of a statement to piggyback on what you just said. I do hope that we will continue to be a little more specific and say things like, yes, you have to have English all 4 years, just as an example. So I'm glad to hear you say
I'm
that.
definitely leaning that way. I don't know.
But the broader question is, how do these rules fit in with the other rules like mandated Holocaust education or whatever? Where does that fit in?
You want to hear it?
So those are more units that can be embedded into classes, and we can look through our curriculum and identify where those need to be put in. They're not full courses or credits, but we have to be careful of where they fit into larger classes. So we also haven't mentioned that the colleges have some very clear requirements too. So that is a factor that's not on your pages here, but that's clearly in our mind as we choose and work with you on what, or the policy committee on what exactly will define the influence of our college, our colleges beyond in Connecticut and beyond will be very obvious in the way we craft this, so our students have the greatest advantage to get into the school that fits them best.
Thank you. And go ahead.
Just to follow up with the Holocaust question, because that does come up, and there's legislation being talked about right now about requiring certain things, which a lot of people rail against. And to me, they're things that if you don't have that in your curriculum, you have a significant problem already. It doesn't specify every student. It specifies schools will offer. The way the language is, it's not like we have to recenter it. That being said, we're not going to not have kids take U.S. history. That's.
And I want to piggyback one last thing, because it tie those two ideas together. It does drive, some of those questions do drive the level of flexibility we want to have or don't want to have. We could very easily, with the 9 STEM or the 9 humanities, dictate exactly what we want those 9 to be, but that would sort of be putting all kids onto the same path and not allowing for flexibility. But we may want to maintain some of that flexibility, and currently, for the Holocaust example, I know that the Social Studies Department has an assured learning experience or units of study within modern world history, which is something that we have historically required for all students, to sort of guarantee that even above and beyond what the state is saying. These are some of the conversations that we're currently engaged in as to how do we preserve flexibility, what are those things that we want to maintain, and it also seeks to explain why the health went up, why the state went up at its health requirements, because there were so many curricular mandates, unit-based mandates, that they found that the number of credits that they were requiring really didn't suffice. You needed to have more seat time, more credit time in health in order to meet all of those mandates.
Thank you. And again, I would say, personally, in addition to 4 years of English, it would be terrible to graduate an American high school student without some U.S. history. Just saying. But my last question is about vocational education, which is not part of the 25 as far as I can tell. So does that mean if you want to take vocational courses, it has to be in addition to 25 credits?
Not in addition, but certainly within our electives, and depending on how some of those vocational opportunities are spelled out, that's one of the pieces that we need to look at. I'll use automotive technology as an example. What I think of when I think of auto tech class from my experience graduating in 1986 versus what I see that students can experience today in automotive, it's a question of, okay, does that fit the intent or West Hartford's intent for what technology education is or is not? And if not, well, that's still an offering that we can certainly accomplish within the elective credits or certainly even within a capstone experience, if a student were to be going out and doing some job shadowing, job experience, workplace experience as their capstone, if that were their interest. And that's really the piece that we need to look at in a comprehensive way. We can figure out with some ease what that competitive college track looks like, and the 25 credits really isn't a stretch for that, but it's looking more comprehensively at all the different pathways that we have for all of our students and making sure that we have the programming that's right and fits the credits.
And our career technical education, Paul answered it well, talking about our auto tech classes. There's a reason it's called auto tech now, not just auto, because you need to have an understanding. I mean, the first thing you bring your car in is they plug it in. So I think that's important. I think it's also important, as you know, as we shift kind of what we're thinking of as vocational. When you saw the kids from Duffy here, from the coding club, coding is a significant vocational area right now. And it's kind of interesting that here we've chosen for it to live in our computer science, including AP computer science areas, to live both in math and in technical education, including with tech ed teachers being the teachers of that area. So it is kind of a shift in what we're thinking of pure vocational also.
Yeah, thank you. I was just concerned about exactly those students, so thank you very much.
So, Paul, what's the bluff? The bottom line up front for the rest of us, not military. What's the fiscal? As a fiscal hawk, I've got to ask the question. The bottom line up front, and what's it going to cost? And and you mentioned the college as well. I was concerned about that immediately. How are we going to? If other schools across the country have less demanding criteria, less classes. They have more time to study, get better grades, and now that we're putting more on the kids, and I know you sit on the national board, so that concerns me as well, but what's it going to cost us for this unfunded mandate?
So I'll take the first time, and I'll let Ann talk about the college piece. So it's a little early for me to give you a definitive, but I'll give you my swag, which for you guys is the scientific guess. I'll leave it at that. You figure out the other letters. Looking at the graduating classes of 2017 and 18, we actually see what's interesting. We see a marked difference 2017-18 from 2015-16 in terms of the total number of credits. So in the last 2 years, in 17 and 18, roughly 77% of our students have hit the number of credits they would need to under these new requirements. So maybe they didn't hit all necessarily the right boxes, but that's just easy. That's just programming. If I've got 25 credits already and I needed one more of them to be STEM and one fewer of them to be something else, then that's just course selection process. So we're really looking at 20%, and we broke that into two categories: kids that needed just one more class or a semester class, and then kids that might need 2 or more credits and maybe some change to our programming. Had a very fast conversation with Chip to take a sense of that, and just to keep it general, his impression was less than I would have thought. Not a significant number of not the significant impact that I may have thought. I don't want to pin it down to a number right now if I can avoid that, but it was small, which was surprising to me. When we first kind of started to think about this, we thought it was going to be a dramatic impact. If for whatever reason 2017 and 18 are kind of different for some reason, and kids were just I don't see kids starting to take less, given that the requirements are going up. So I think our staffing levels are closer than 2 years ago, and it won't be a big impact. I don't know about the college.
I think we're going to be looking and working with our focus groups and our with the board policy committee, and Paul and I are also meeting with area assistant superintendents to look at the best way to make this as flexible for our students as possible, keeping it at the level that, that we're used to here in West Hartford. There are a lot of changes we can make, small changes that we can make that will allow the flexibility to earn credits in new ways, and we want to explore those. Our students, they're living in a new world every year, and so we will look at ways to keep it flexible, to keep our standards high, and to allow students to demonstrate and earn credit for what they can do in as many good ways as possible. I think you're probably not surprised that Paul and I right away went to the data to see what it said, and we were pretty encouraged to see over 70% of the students are there already. So our biggest task will be to figure out how best to serve not only everybody, but specifically the students who are struggling to get to our current graduation requirements.
Right, I thought 70% was a high number as well. But on a national level, with this being, Connecticut authorizing these 25 or mandating these 25 extra credits, how do we compare it to the rest of the country?
Well,
I can jump in on that. It's kind of one of the things that's shifted throughout much of the country is this dual enrollment trend that you've seen in the South and the West, especially with community colleges, and it's almost changed the credit game in a lot of places where people are getting both college and high school credits at the same time. It's different than our ECE program. Our ECE is the closest we have with UConn, but it's still not the same as what you're seeing in other places, especially in rural America, with online learning. So this doesn't put our kids, I think, to cut to the chase, I don't think this puts our kids at any kind of disadvantage against kids from any other state. Because the fact is, the kids that you're talking about, they're already taking that number of credits, or they're within a half a credit, or there's something. So what we're talking about is the 20 to 25% of kids that we're going to have to look at, okay, what are the reasons that they're not reaching that? One major reason could be special education. So we talk about how do we grant credits in special education, what does that look like, and what does our resource support look like there? Credit recovery and summer school may be something, as we talk more, that plays a more active role for perhaps a larger number of our students. And then the question is, what does the credits around capstone look like? Is it, that's another question, because that's pure mastery based. And there are mastery based pieces within this legislation that we've got to flesh out more as we talk about it. What does the mastery based? The problem with this, one piece of this legislation that Ann and I talk about is that in one part of it, it talks about removing seat time as the credit granting mechanism. But in the other part, it specifies seat time as a credit granting mechanism. So it still needs some more clarity, which is what we're going to be getting.
I want to piggyback on one thing that Tom brought up that kind of gets to the bottom line. Our initial look at our data shows that the majority of our kids are well situated for this. It's really a lot of our work has to do, I think, as Tom mentioned, to our lowest 10% or our lowest 20% of students that, whether it's special education, students with disabilities, and their inability necessarily to get credit under our current mechanisms because their supports are not in an accredited environment, and how we adjust to that. But then also our students that are struggling, who may fail a class and need to repeat a class, and what our programming looks like in order to make them successful. Because if they were just successful, they'd be up there with the rest of the 70%. And so while we get all students there, or we get really significantly large numbers of students to the graduation, or our metrics on graduation are outstanding, it's sort of changing the look at how we can provide that programming to where the minimum bar goes from that 21.75 up to a 24.25. I use 24 because of that capstone experience does not need to be a seat time piece. And that's where potentially, programming differently for STEM students, where some costs really may come in that we haven't necessarily identified exactly how we're gonna crack that shell.
So I guess a follow-up of that, and obviously we've got to talk about the 30% or 20 ish percent. And, you know, I talked earlier about falling through the cracks. We don't want any of our kids to fall through the cracks. But West Hartford, we're fortunate enough to receive a lot of accolades on how great our school system is, right? If our graduation rate goes down and on a national level, right, or even on a state level, that affects us because that's a big number and it's weighted heavily. So when I talk on a national level, I guess those are the things too I'm talking about. You know, so our college entrants, you know, getting into even our contiguous New England here, you know, getting into UMass or anywhere. Well, no one really wants to go there, but but getting into, you know, the schools in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Vermont. So if it falls, how's that going to affect it with our current requirements on our graduation rate? You know, if we fall down and we're only graduating, you know, what is our number now? 97. So if we go down below that, you know? So then our school system.
I'm going to say, you know, I'm going to let Ann respond to some. But I really don't see us letting that happen. And that I want to credit. Ann's done some outreach immediately with other area districts, high-performing districts that we have a planned scheduled meeting with. We're all concerned about this, and we're going to put our heads together and talk about what are the different things, and really leverage the knowledge of a number of really smart educators, so that we're coming out with the best plan, the best programming, and we're collaborating within the larger community here in the state to do that right and make sure those numbers don't fall. No one wants to see their numbers fall. So I don't know if you want to talk a little more to that.
I would just say that's the core of our work, Mark, to make sure that as we approach this, we keep in mind the flexibility and the needs of our students who are going to struggle the most with this. And I think that's the core of our work, is to craft it in a way that's flexible enough but rigorous enough, and it keeps in mind the students struggling currently to get 21.75 credits. And if that's more support in the 9th grade year, which Paul and I have talked about, keeping kids on track to move forward, that may be a piece of it, to keep learning opportunities flexible. Again, keeping it at a high standard, but flexible. Looking at all the, there are other opportunities in this legislation for service learning credit, and we need to explore that. So I think what you're speaking to is what we need to be doing to ensure that we do not see drops and ensure that we act quickly with students, especially, I would say, this first class, to make sure they stay on track. Some schools have even gone as far as hiring on-track coordinators for 9th grade, because 9th grade is such a crucial year to keep your students moving towards 4-year on-time graduation. So I think you're speaking to our work, and I think we're excited to do it. It could, I believe we can create something that serves our students even better.
So Ann, and I was going to ask a similar question in terms of the transition.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, would you say 2023?
They're
You're
8th
rising,
graders.
Yep, the 8th graders and the rising freshmen.
Yes.
And I know through a number of the emails that we received that there was a number of issues and concerns about a lot of the work that they currently have in terms of homework or what have you. I'm not opposed to that, because I always think that, I think of it as intensive training. The more intensive it is, you're always prepared for what's coming. And then when you finally do get it, it's like, oh, that wasn't so bad because you were already prepared. So my question is, as our 8th graders transition to the 9th grade, and now we're looking at more credits for them to obtain for graduation. And you touched upon some of that in terms of a strategic plan. Freshmen are already apprehensive, right? Because now they're in high school, so they are trying to get used to their new environment. And then, you know, there's all this work that they have to do. Yeah. So, and the counselors also plays a key role in this particular, you know, shift, as you will. So how or what are you all looking at, you know, as this rolls out going forward? Because you're going to have some of that anxiousness, and sometimes that anxiousness is the barrier, right? Where they should be focused and, what I want to say, comfortable to go to their teachers or guidance counselors saying, I'm struggling here before it gets too late. what are some things that we're doing to address that?
Well, I'd like to start out by saying I'm the parent of a ninth grader. So I'm living the transition and the increased requirements, increased homework and intensity, and the anxiety that that can come with that, and manage that. So I'm having firsthand knowledge of that right now. One move the schools made 2 years, I think, ago now, which I think is key, is dedicating 2 ninth of the 8 counselors at each school. They've dedicated 2 to the ninth grade so that they are very tuned into the needs of ninth graders. So I think we have to continue to listen to them, find out what's working, identify how many students are showing signs of at risk for not passing into 10th grade. So we're going to have to listen to them, work with them, and see what resources they need. We need to communicate very well with parents and students. And I do believe that one of the ways to reduce anxiety is to show kids there's multiple pathways to achieve these 25 credit. It's not one program that you all have to do the same way, that there's going to be, it will be rigorous, it will be challenging, but that we have the support that you need and we have flexible approaches to getting there. And I actually think this legislation, if we enact it creatively, and we can help students to see that there's many paths towards these 25 credits.
So if I could jump in with one small example, and we haven't even talked about it, but it's the kind, and I don't want to jump ahead and offer things, but Mark, in terms of financial costs, there'll be less study halls. So how do we augment that 2:15 to 3 o'clock every day, where it's not just a kind of a kid necessarily trying to find their way for extra help, but to really look at 2:15 to 3 o'clock, not just kind of the homework center, but more formalized extra help study time where parents can say, no, you're staying till 3 if you can, and what does that mean with late buses? So these are the kind of discussions we have to have, because how do we make up for that time? Because we know that hopefully that time in the school gets put to a little bit better use maybe than the iPod in the ear, or not iPod, nobody has those anymore, but that kind of thing.
So 2007.
Gus.
Yeah. So after the presentation ended, there was a lot of talk about adding more specific requirements. I feel like a lot of students would really be against those more detailed requirements, because I feel this way, and a lot of other students do too, is every year they hand you the program of studies. It's a massive book like this thick with all the classes in it, and then you flip through it and you realize that because of all the district and state mandated classes, you're only going to have time to do 3 or 4 of them over your 4 years of high school. So I think that the flexibility that the state requirements allow could let people, or let students take the classes that they want to, and if we add more requirements, then I think we're going to be taking away that freedom.
Yep.
So I think that is really valuable feedback, and that leads into my first question, which is who is on the committee, and maybe you already mentioned this, but who's on the committee that's working with you to develop their recommendations? I think student feedback and school counselor feedback will be critical to helping to move this forward. That's my first question.
About 1.5 years ago, we started to bring together a representative group from the high schools that had counselors, assistant principals, and department supervisors, as well as the high school principals. And we worked heavily on the performance standard part of this, which we haven't talked about yet, but that's been in place throughout. That's not new. We just took the performance standard that students had to meet in the past and updated it for the SAT. And we did a lot of that work. So we're going to work with that same committee, that same core committee, which does have counselors, department supervisors, and school-based administration. And then we'll go out to whoever else we need to as we move along. For instance, we might need to be consulting with CHIP on impact for FTEs, or of course, always with Tom, as well as the policy committee. I met last week with the counseling staff at Conard, and I will continue to meet with them. And then Paul and I work almost every day a little bit on this throughout our other work. And as we've said a couple times, we will be meeting with area schools that are all, working to implement to the best for their children as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just recommend including some students if you can, because I think there are feedback about what types of classes they want to take that will get them enthusiastic and remain engaged in learning. I think that would be helpful.
And I
as we
think
move
Gus's
forward.
comment speaks pretty much to, where Ann and I are philosophically with this, so we do recognize that, and that's one of our goals, to provide that flexibility. So.
Great. So my second question is around timing, because it's my recollection that 8th graders are going to be choosing their classes for high school, in like March-ish or so? So do we need to have this all tidied up and passed through the policy committee and the full board by then in order for the 8th graders to make their selections?
We don't need everything tidied up by then. We would like to ideally have this done with some efficiency, but these are big decisions, and we're recognizing that. The good news is, I think to the point that Gus just made, our current schedule offers students realistically one elective plus their core requirements. And in the freshman year, the reality is, even under these new graduation requirements, the core requirements, you're still taking, I think I heard a lot of folks talk about, social studies that would be required, English. On my expectation, everyone's in a math. Most students are in a world language now at some point in the year, whereas most students would likely take, we can run numbers on how many students have taken world language in the past. Now it's at some point within your 4 years, you must come in with a credit if you're not coming in with that credit from middle school already. So I don't see a dramatic impact relative to the course selection, but the impact that I do see is certainly as this cohort starts to reach their junior and senior year, and they have that greater flexibility within their schedule for electives, and knowing what that capstone experience will look like and what courses they might want, what elective courses they might have wanted to follow in order to ready themselves for that. That's where we definitely want to have it fine-tuned. So we are hopeful to, in the short term, have good guidance for our freshmen and our parents of rising freshmen. But we do feel that we do have some time to work out some of the finer details that'll impact the actual course selection.
The biggest lift for the incoming 9th graders in terms of us is really in combination with Gretchen and policy in terms of credit granting and what it looks like with resource, and how are we talking about what that really is, because that's really the only area in 9th grade that's at all a piece that I say, okay, how are we going to work with that? So as far as it does start with next year's 9th graders, but the impact on this in 9th grade is probably the least grade that there's an impact on with this.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Paul and Ann. Okay, our next agenda item are routine matters, the financial report, approval, excuse me. May I have, approval of the financial report for the period ending October 31st, 2018. Recommendation that the Board of Education approve the financial report for the period ending October 31st, 2018. May I have a motion? A second?
Second.
Discussion.
So I'll be providing the financial report for this evening. And if you turn to page 8 of your agenda booklets, we'll start there. We're running basically where we expect to be running for this time of year. Just a couple of little minor changes from expectations in salaries. We hired an additional IT person, minor update on the department supervisor salary, in 5112 through 5114. These are just some minor changes as teachers come and go, and we hire new teachers in at a different rate than the old teachers who left, or former teachers. They're not all old, of course, who left. And under maintenance, 5150, we were just a little bit slow to hire some replacements, so a little extra there. Nothing really new to report on benefits. It's still a little bit too early to know about that. Moving to purchases, Again, a little bit too early to know about the professional technical services. We're on target for transportation. And under tuition, we have a little bit of a surplus. We're not sure exactly where this is going to end up, but for right now, we have fewer outplaced special ed students and fewer inter-district magnets. So we'll have a better sense of this in a few months. Moving on to the state and federal grant funds on the next page. As a reminder, the items above the line are the one-year grants and the first year of two-year grants. Anything below the line is the second year of two-year grants, and generally speaking, we're going to be on track for spending those. On the special funds report, these are special funds outside of our general pool of money. We can carry money forward year to year as needed. You'll notice in 596,800, the preschool account, a change there, and some of this is related to the low tuition that we end up charging, which is as a result of receiving some Smart Start funds from the state. So we may need to make some tweaks to that moving forward. Under nutrition services on the next page, we are doing okay with nutrition services, a little bit ahead of last year. We don't have any significant issues on this, but we do want more people to buy school lunches. So more tater tots, I guess, or whatever the more popular items are. No tater tots, baked potato puffs, baked puffs, if I remember correctly. But we expect to end relatively close to balance. Are there any questions?
Can I just say that about the nutrition services? Every year we go down in numbers of meals that we purchase and things like that. But I don't remember since I've been on the board ever coming this close to zero as an extra cost. So I just want to, whatever you guys have been doing to bring down the costs and bring it closer to our expenses, we're hemorrhaging much less than we have in the past. So I just think it's great.
Yeah, that's been true for the last 2 years. We made changes 2 years ago that significantly reduced our losses. We had some losses 3 and 4 years ago, but
right. But this strikes me as even better this year. So
we expected that by this point the board would be putting in a few $100,000 into the budget every year by this point, and it's been a lot of change made. Tim Brzezinski's done a really good job.
Tim's done an excellent job at really, lowering the food costs through accessing DOD, and also bringing in fresh fruits and vegetables with some DOD produce. So he's done a great job.
Deb, this is your first report as a financial examiner. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave, for allowing me to fill your shoes.
Any other questions? Are we ready for the vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Next agenda item is approval of the minutes. Approval of the minutes from the November 20th regular board meeting. That the Board of Education approve the minutes of the regular Board of Education meeting of November 20th, 2018. May I have a motion?
So moved.
And a second?
Seconded.
Discussion. I know that when I read the initial meeting minutes that there appeared to be an error. So I believe in front of everybody is a revised copy. And so if we're all okay with that.
The revised.
The revised.
Yeah.
Okay. So if not hearing any other discussion and we're ready for the vote, all in favor of the minutes with the necessary correction in terms of the revision, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And any opposed? No. So everything carries. Next item is information and reports. Board members, communication and reports. Anyone have any report outs for boards or other organizations at this time? Dave?
I had the pleasure of attending the West Hartford Community Television Board meeting last night and learned a lot. This was my first meeting as the board's rep to this committee, and I learned a lot, a good insight into their activities and their needs. They presented their budget for the coming year, and I've got to tell you, this is a group that really pores over, seems like every dollar they spend, and takes great care to make sure they're making wise use of the funds that they receive. They receive from the Board of Education, from the town. They have fundraisers, and there's a 5K run that they're planning, for example. Little different things they're trying to do. And as many of you know, the West Hartford Community Television broadcasts our meetings. For example, they go out on the television, and they also have them on the YouTube channel. And this was interesting. It's just a vital resource that I hadn't really appreciated. And I just want to give you some stats that I found after the meeting. Just as an example, our meeting when we started up the school year on September 4th, it was on YouTube. There were 88 views of that meeting. On October 2nd, there were 58 views of that meeting. October 16th, we had 278 views of our October 16th meeting. November 7th, there were 218 views, so down a little bit. But our last meeting on November 20th, there were 1,080 views. So it's just a vital resource. It's there when you need it, and it's really neat to see that. Now, back to that budget, one of the things that the folks are doing is they said, you know, if we can get people to subscribe to that YouTube channel, that might bring in some additional income. And so they're going to make an effort to encourage folks who view the programs on the YouTube channel. Just hit subscribe. There's no cost to you for that, and it may result in some additional funds for them. So kudos to the folks there.
Thank you, Dave. What about any other?
I just want to share that yesterday I had the pleasure of going to Charter Oak. They had their Star Assembly there, and the students there gave a presentation on their starting for the first time a student government there. So the students there talked about the process of identifying who is going to be a part of the student government, why they're doing it, and how they really want to enrich the community overall. And it really was inspiring. It just reminds me so much how we can learn from our young people. And seeing the young people talk about why they want to go into student government reminded me of why I'm here, and I'm imagining why all of us are here as well, that we are here to serve our young people and to serve our town. And with that, I do just want to say, again, I was just so inspired by the young people that sang before us this morning. And there were just 3 quotes I just wanted to share if possible. One of the things I'm not too good at is walking around the pink elephant in the room. And I think many of us know that the past couple of weeks have been quite tension-filled. And for that, it just reminds me of the great quote that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, that the great measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in moments of controversy and trial, or something along those lines. So I think this really is a wonderful opportunity for all of us as a board to show how we are, how we serve, and that the purpose for us being on the board, which I know is to service our young people and to make choices that are in their best interest. It also reminded me of a quote that the late Ronald Reagan once said, the late President Ronald Reagan once said, which is, peace is not absence of conflict. It is the ability to handle conflict by peaceful means. I think that, again, speaks well that we can have differences of opinion, but it is important for us to recognize our feelings, our thoughts, but to handle ourselves accordingly. And the last quote I would like to share was said by Theodore Steinway, and again, this is quite fitting with our young people that were here today. He said, in one of our concert grand pianos, 243 taut strings exert a pull of 40,000 pounds on an iron frame. It is proof that out of great tension may come great harmony. So I look forward to working collectively with all of you again, remembering our purpose for being here and trying to collectively make decisions that are in the best interest of our young people.
Thank you, Lorna.
I guess I need to follow that. I wanted to report that I had the pleasure of attending the West Hartford Human Rights Commission's event last night on the anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And my colleague Cheryl was also attending and participating in this event. And just kudos to this, to our Human Rights Commission. This was an amazing demonstration of the diversity of our town and of the commitment to human rights. There were musical selections, poetry, there were students, there were older people, there were elected officials, community members. People read sections of the Declaration in a variety of different languages. I think I counted at least a dozen different languages. It was just incredible, and I really encourage anyone to attend next year on the 71st anniversary of the Declaration of Human Rights.
And thank you for that, Deb. Moving to non-staff communication and reports from our student board representatives. And I'll let the two of you decide who wants to go first.
All right. Hi, everyone. So it's been pretty busy recently. You know how things always seem to, I don't know, get busy before Christmas break. I don't know why, but it's how things are. So the Conard Choir performed at the Wolfpack game on Saturday night. Last week, Trumbull Kitchen Chef and Executive Chef and Conard parent Chris Torla presented to the cooking and foods classes, and he demonstrated things like proper knife skills so that students would be able to cook safely in school classes. Later this month, on December 19th, the winter concert will be performed at 7 in the auditorium. And earlier that day at 9:30, they're doing a performance for the senior citizens in town. The Conard Field hockey team was awarded the Lucy Goodridge Sportsmanship Award. Senior Helkin Sosa has been named a semifinalist in the Coca-Cola Scholars Program. He was one of 1,900 students selected from an initial pool of over 200,000, so he's going to be moving on to the next stage of competition, and good luck, Helkin. Liam Lacroix has been named number 30 in a list of the best skaters in high school hockey in Connecticut. Grace Evans has been named as Conard's recipient of the Farmington Valley Superintendent's Association Award. And Gavin Sherry, the Hartford Current, named him the cross-country athlete of the season. And lastly, winter sports teams have just started practicing this week, and games are going to be beginning soon. Go Chieftains!
Good evening, everyone. To start things right off, the first student-directed show of the year, Black Comedy, just closed after an extremely successful run, directed by two students, two seniors, which I always find very impressive. And next to perform in the Black Box will be The Answer, which is Hall's comedy improv troupe. Their show is on December 14th at 7, and the show is $3, so I encourage anyone to go. Disclaimer, I am in The Answer, so this board meeting, this is actually just a shameless self-promo for me. This Friday, as been mentioned, is the Unified Theater Talent Show in the Hall's Auditorium. I've seen firsthand a lot of the students have been working so hard on this event, so I encourage anyone to go who has this Friday free. The winter sports season is just beginning. We have practices starting this week and games starting next week. Participation is through the roof, especially indoor track. We have over 200 kids signed up for that, so it's going to make for a great season. And of course, a special shout out to Jenna Zdanowicz, who is named one of Hartford Current's Girls Cross Country Athletes of the Season. I know from firsthand experience, she is a wonderful runner and teammate, so congratulations to her. Thank you.
Thank you. And congratulations to Mark, too, because I know he put a lot of work into it. All right, next on the agenda, future business, announcement of future meeting dates. So our next meeting will be Tuesday, December 18th, 2018, regular Board of Education meeting at 7 p.m., Town Hall, right here in this room, which is 314 Legislative Chamber. And it will be followed by the next meeting, Tuesday, January 15th, 2019, regular Board of Education meeting, and we will have presentation of the CIP at 7 p.m. right here on the Legislative Chamber. So that means that will be one meeting for the month of January.
Yeah, there's the workshop isn't scheduled yet. There's the other meeting's a workshop.
Do we have a request for future agenda items? Okay. Moving to the next item on the agenda, which is comments from visitors. Do we have any at this time in the audience that wish to come forward? All right, moving right along, we do not have executive session, so may I have a motion to adjourn tonight? A second? I'm assuming there's no discussion, so we can go straight to vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And we are adjourned. And I get to hit the gavel at 9 p.m.